Get this straight. If no one here can speak Mandarin right now, this entire $75 million deal dies, and this hotel goes down with it. The words of Edward Harrington, CEO of the Regency Lux, cracked through the marble lobby like a whip, silencing every whisper and freezing every glance. That is the shocking reality that set the tone of what was about to unfold. Before we go further, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. Subscribe and like so more people can hear stories like this. Now, let's return to the story. To a summer afternoon in Manhattan inside one of the most luxurious hotels in America, where power, pride, and prejudice collided in a way no one could have predicted. The Regency Lux stood like a 40-story monument to wealth, glass walls glistening against Central Park, its lobby lined with Italian travertine, gold accents, and crystal chandeliers. Yet beneath that shine ran a current of fear, inequality, and silence. On this day, Chen Wei, a Chinese billionaire worth $60 billion, had just walked in with an entourage of 15, bodyguards in dark suits, assistants with laptops, advisors with contracts ready to finalize a summit that would bring $75 million into the hotel. The AI summit was meant to be the crowning jewel of Harrington's career. It would fill every suite, pack every ballroom, and secure headlines across the globe. But the interpreter, the single thread holding Edward's dream together, had canceled that morning without explanation. No backup had been found, and the clock was already ticking. Edward, standing tall in his $3,000 navy suit, had to pretend he was in control when his chest was burning with panic. He tried a translation app on his phone, but technology betrayed him. When he tried to say, "Our cybersecurity protocols meet the highest international standards," the screen glowed back with a broken phrase that translated more like, "Our guards are very polite." When he attempted to tell Chen, "Your keynote will be hosted in our luxury suite," the app mangled it into, "Big shiny room." Laughter whispered among guests. Cameras rose into the air, and murmurs in Mandarin rippled through Chen's aides, who began shifting toward the exit. Edward's hand trembled so slightly that only the concierge beside him saw it. $20 million in debt pressed against his ribs like a hidden weight. The board wanted results. The creditors wanted answers. He had nothing to give except desperation. Anyone here who speaks Mandarin. Edward barked into the mic, his voice cracking under the chandeliers. Staff froze, afraid to move, afraid to speak. A bellhop lowered his gaze. A receptionist shifted awkwardly, and near the base of the grand staircase, a woman mopping the floor paused but did not lift her head. Her name was Maya Jackson, 38 years old, a black single mother, invisible in her uniform, but once a graduate of Columbia University with a degree in East Asian studies. She had spent her youth reading Chinese poets, falling in love with Mandarin tones that felt like music, believing her path would take her into embassies, boardrooms, or classrooms. But life had not listened. Life had shoved her toward debt, layoffs, prejudice, and survival for 7 years. She had pushed a mop across these polished floors, dismissed as just the help, carrying with her a gift no one cared to see. Yet as she listened now, every word from Chen Wei was clear to her. She heard his request for cybersecurity guarantees. She understood his aide pressing for written breach protocols. She recognized his subtle mention of cultural respect, the kind of line only an experienced negotiator would add to test the intelligence of his counterpart. Maya could have answered each point cleanly, fluently, with the respect of a native speaker and the precision of a trained scholar. But she stayed silent, because she remembered the sting of being told by Malik, the hotel's head of security, "Stay in your place. Maya, don't try to be more than what you are." She remembered being waved off by managers who called her sweetheart and brushed away her suggestions as if her mind didn't matter. She remembered her daughter Amara asking one night, Mom, do people know how smart you are? And feeling her throat close because the answer was too painful. Still, her ears could not turn off. She heard Chen's voice harden, measured but final, as he said to his aide in Mandarin, "If they cannot communicate, we leave. We do not waste time." The aide nodded. A camera phone zoomed closer. A guest chuckled under his breath. Edward, seeing the deal slip away, tried to bow slightly, then gestured at a screen filled with flags and slogans under the banner Cultural Excellence. But even the flags were wrong. Chen's eyes narrowed. His foot turned 10 degrees toward the exit. The sound of an elevator ding behind them felt like a countdown. That was when Loretta Brooks, the head housekeeper, caught Maya's eyes. Loretta, 58, had worked here for 2 decades and knew the quiet courage of the people who kept the place running. She tilted her chin toward Maya. A wordless message. "You have the key." Maya's hands tightened around the mop. Her heart thudded with memory. Her professor's voice. Accurate language is oxygen in a storm. Her mother's words, "Don't let them bury your light." And her daughter's soft whisper as they studied poetry together. "Say it again. Mom, say it like you mean it." She set the mop handle gently into the bucket. Water rippled. Her reflection blurred. Malik noticed her step forward and moved to block her, muttering, "Don't make a scene." But something in her face made him pause. It wasn't defiance. It was resolve. Edward barked again. "We will email details." The aide responded in Mandarin. "We are done here." The crowd shifted. Phones pointed. The moment was collapsing. And then Maya moved. 1 step, then 2. Across the marble floor that separated failure from possibility. She lifted her head, met Chen Wei's gaze, and opened her mouth. The first sound came, pure and steady, in flawless Mandarin, a phrase so sharp and so clear that everyone within earshot stopped breathing. "You? A maid? Don't embarrass yourself." Those were the words Malik Thompson hissed under his breath as Maya Jackson took one bold step into the circle of light where billionaires and CEOs stood frozen. Words that were meant to crush her before she even began. Words that carried years of dismissal and scorn. That insult, dripping with contempt, became the shocking spark that pushed her forward instead of holding her back. With steady breath, she lifted her chin and spoke in flawless Mandarin, the words so clean and natural that Chen Wei blinked in surprise. "Mr. Chen," she said, "I understand you are asking about data sovereignty and cybersecurity protocols. Allow me to answer." A ripple moved through the lobby, staff and guests alike whipping their heads toward her as though someone had just spoken from the wrong body. For 7 years she had mopped floors, carried linens, scrubbed stains no one else wanted to touch. For 7 years she had been invisible. Now she sounded like a diplomat, every syllable polished, every tone perfect. Chen, startled but intrigued, tilted his head and asked another question, this one sharper, about breach protocols, about how long it would take the hotel to report and respond if there were a cyber attack during the summit. Without hesitation, Maya answered in his language, outlining industry-standard response times, quoting exact figures, even referencing a cultural expectation of face-to-face disclosure in the event of an incident. Chen's lips curved upward slightly. He wasn't just hearing language, he was hearing respect for nuance. The aides behind him leaned forward. Pens ready? Then he asked her a question that wasn't in the contract at all. And what about cultural hosting etiquette? How would you welcome dignitaries from Beijing? Maya smiled gently and replied with knowledge no app could ever supply. She spoke of greeting order, the placement of nameplates, the avoidance of certain colors at banquets, the honoring of elders with precise introductions. Her words flowed with warmth, not just accuracy. And when she finished, Chen clapped his hands together softly in approval. The sound was small, but in that grand lobby it was thunder. Edward Harrington's face drained of color. Malik's jaw clenched like stone. Tanya at the front desk covered her mouth with both hands. Loretta, watching from the sidelines, lifted her chin proudly as if to say, "That's my girl." But Maya's courage came laced with trembling inside. She remembered nights when she studied poetry on the floor while Amara slept beside her. She remembered the sting of walking into job interviews where they smiled politely and told her she wasn't the right fit. She remembered hearing other workers say, "She's smart, but she's only housekeeping." All of that rose like a wave behind her voice, and she kept speaking, now quoting a line of Du Fu that she had taught Amara just the night before. "Though the nation is broken, mountains and rivers remain." Chen's eyes widened. That line had been etched into his heart since his youth. To hear it spoken by a woman in a maid's uniform, with perfect tones, in a lobby filled with people expecting her silence, hit him like a chord of destiny. He asked her, "Where did you learn Mandarin?" She told him, still in his language, about Columbia University, about late nights of study, about falling in love with Chinese poetry at 17. She admitted that life had pressed her into a different path, but her passion never died. Chen's gaze softened. He saw her not as a uniform, but as a mind. Edward, desperate to regain control, snapped. "That's enough. Miss Jackson, step back. You're disrupting a critical negotiation." But his words fell flat. The billionaire wasn't listening to him anymore. Chen addressed Maya directly. "And your daughter, does she speak Mandarin?" Maya blinked in shock that he would ask something so personal, but then her lips curved with pride. "She is learning. She asks me every night to teach her one new word." Chen chuckled, a deep, warm sound that contrasted with his stern reputation. "Then she will have a future, because you, Miss Jackson, are extraordinary." The room erupted into whispers, phones recording, the story already flying across social media. Malik shifted uncomfortably, knowing the tide had turned. Tanya, who had once rolled her eyes at Maya's quiet ways, now felt shame creep up her neck. Loretta's smile grew broader. And Maya, though she stood tall and spoke without falter, felt her hands shaking at her sides. She had just crossed a line she could never retreat from. For 7 years, she had been invisible, in a single minute. She had made herself unforgettable. Chen tested her once more, this time with a complex question about Chinese diplomatic protocol, involving how to address ministers and balance hierarchy. She answered perfectly, reciting both the formal process and the subtle gestures that build trust. His aides began scribbling notes furiously, some even nodding in agreement. Then he asked a final question. "Why are you mopping floors in this place?" The lobby went dead silent. Every phone, every camera, every guest leaned in. Maya swallowed, feeling tears press against the back of her eyes, but she kept her voice steady, because life closed many doors. "Sir?" But language was the one door I refused to let shut. Chen did not move for several seconds, just stared at her as if measuring her soul. Then, finally, he nodded. "Good. Very good." Edward, red-faced, tried to speak again, but the authority had already left his voice. The billionaire was no longer speaking to him. He was speaking to the woman who had been dismissed for years and yet held the key to saving the deal. In that moment, Maya realized she had leapt into the fire, and instead of burning, she was shining. The lobby, once filled with panic and chaos, was now filled with awe, and standing at the center of it was a maid who dared to speak. 7 years. 7 years you had her cleaning toilets while she spoke better Mandarin than half the diplomats in this city. Those were the scalding words Chen Wei hurled across the marble lobby of the Regency Lux. Words that landed like a slap across Edward Harrington's face. Words that ripped the last thread of control from his hands. That is how the rebellion began. Chen's question about Maya's place at the hotel hung heavy in the air. Maya herself lowered her eyes, but Loretta Brooks did not. She stepped forward, arms folded, her voice cutting through the tension like steel wrapped in velvet. "Mr. Chen," she said, "she is not the only one wasted here. For years this hotel has treated people like me, like Maya, like the bellhop over there, as though we're invisible. We keep this place running. But to him," and she flicked her eyes toward Edward, "we are just uniforms." The crowd gasped. A housekeeper had never spoken like that in public. Not under the crystal chandeliers, not in front of wealthy guests, not to a CEO who built his reputation on control. But once Loretta broke the silence, others followed. Tanya Rodriguez, the receptionist who had always kept her head down, suddenly found courage rising in her throat. "She's right," Tanya blurted. "I've watched guests treat Maya like she was nothing, and I stayed quiet because I was scared for my job. But I saw her brilliance. I saw it when she explained things to guests that none of us understood, and we ignored her." A waiter stepped forward, apron still tied, voice shaking. "I saw Mr. Harrington yell at her once in front of everyone for being in the wrong hallway, even though she was helping a lost guest. We all saw it. The bellhop, no more than 23, spoke next. He told me to keep my head down too. Said promotions weren't for people like us. Said we should be grateful." Their words tumbled out like water bursting from a broken dam. For years they had carried resentment in silence. Now it poured freely. Edward's face turned crimson. He slammed his fist onto the podium. "This is insubordination. All of you will regret this." But the tide had already turned. Chen lifted a hand, silencing Edward instantly. Then Malik Thompson, the head of security, made his move. He strode across the lobby, towering over Maya, his jaw clenched tight, his hand clamping down on her arm. "That's enough," he growled. "Back to your place before you ruin everything." The room erupted in gasps, phones shot higher, capturing every second. Malik's grip was firm, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and fury. Fear that his own position would crumble if Maya succeeded. Fury that a maid would dare step into a role he had sworn to protect for the powerful, but before Malik could pull her away. Two of Chen's bodyguards moved like shadows, intercepting him with a single step. One seized his wrist, twisting just enough to force him back, the other placing a wall of muscle between him and Maya. Malik's face twisted with shock and humiliation. "You're protecting her? She's nobody!" he shouted. The bodyguard's only reply was silence, the kind that carries more power than words. The crowd gasped again. Guests whispered. Reporters who had been casually observing now raised their cameras with hunger, sensing a story exploding before their eyes. And Chen, calm but thunderous, turned his attention back to Edward. 7 years she has been here, 7 years of brilliance wasted, and you call yourself a leader? His words were brutal, each one a hammer blow. You squander talent, you crush potential, and today, the world will see it, Edward stammered, sweat pooling at his brow. You don't understand. She's a maid. She doesn't have the qualifications for. Chen cut him off with a glare so cold it froze Edward mid-sentence. Qualifications? She has what none of your managers possess. Skill, courage, respect for culture. What do you have? Debt and arrogance. The crowd erupted with murmurs. Guests began filming openly. The videos spread like wildfire across the internet. Within minutes, hashtags began trending. Clips of Maya speaking Mandarin being shared across platforms, side by side with Edward's red face and Malik's aggression. The world was watching. Loretta, seizing the moment, raised her voice even higher. For years, we've been underpaid, overlooked, and silenced. But not today. Today, the truth is out. She pointed directly at Edward. We are not invisible, not anymore. Tanya nodded beside her. The waiter raised his fist. Even the bellhop, trembling but determined, said, If she goes down, we all go down with her. The staff were no longer scattered individuals. They were a rebellion. Edward tried to bark orders, tried to summon authority, but every word he spoke sounded hollow against the roar of truth filling the lobby. Chen raised his hand again, commanding the room with a single gesture. Enough, he said. His gaze locked onto Maya. Tell me, Miss Jackson, why did you stay silent for so long? Maya swallowed hard, her heart pounding. Because every time I tried to speak, someone told me to stop. Because I was afraid of losing my job. Because I needed to feed my daughter. But I could not stop listening. I could not stop learning. And today, I could not stay silent any longer. Chen nodded, his expression unreadable, then turned back to Edward. You have built an empire of glass, fragile and hollow. Today it shatters. The room erupted in cheers from staff, murmurs from guests, furious whispers from executives who realized the story would dominate headlines by nightfall. Maya stood in the middle of it all, trembling, tears brimming in her eyes, but standing tall nonetheless. For the first time in years, she was not invisible. She was undeniable. And Edward Harrington, CEO of the Regency Lux, was watching his empire collapse at the hands of the very people he thought were beneath him. $250 million. Cash. Today, that is my offer for this hotel. Those were the words that thundered from Chen Wei's mouth in the middle of the shattered lobby. Words that left every jaw on the floor. Words that turned a rebellion into an earthquake. Edward Harrington's face drained white at the sound of that number. $250 million. $60 million above the hotel's current market value. Enough to erase its debt. Enough to silence shareholders. Enough to place the Regency Lux in the hands of a man who had just seen with his own eyes what true talent looked like. Edward sputtered. You can't be serious. This hotel is not for sale. But Chen's calm eyes cut through his denial. Everything is for sale when its leadership is bankrupt, he said. And you, sir, are already finished. The crowd gasped. Phones recorded from every angle. Within minutes, the offer would spread across the internet alongside videos of Edward's meltdown and Maya's flawless Mandarin. But the shock wasn't only in the purchase. It was in what Chen said next. I am not buying this hotel to own it, he declared. I am buying it to reform it, and my first act will be to appoint a new director of international relations. He turned toward Maya, who stood trembling, her hands clasped before her, eyes wide as though she had just been struck by lightning. Miss Jackson, Chen said, the position is yours, effective immediately. A gasp rippled through the room, followed by stunned silence. Maya's heart thundered in her chest, so loud she could hear nothing else for a moment. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Edward, finally finding his voice, barked. This is absurd. She's a maid. She has no management experience, no corporate record. She's unfit. Chen's glare cut him off cold. She has what you never valued: skill, courage, integrity, and knowledge. She spoke with more precision in 5 minutes than you have in 5 years. That is leadership. Loretta Brooks clapped her hands together, tears glistening in her eyes. Tanya covered her mouth, whispering, She deserves this. The bellhop cheered. Even some guests applauded. Edward slammed his fist on the podium. I will not accept this humiliation. Chen's voice sharpened. You have no choice. As of today, I will finalize purchase of this hotel, and your reign is over, unless, of course, you would like to remain. Chen paused, his lips curving in a faint, cutting smile, as a janitor, so you may finally learn the dignity of the labor you once despised. The room exploded in gasps and murmurs. Edward's face turned a deep shade of crimson. "You dare? Me? A janitor?" His voice shook with rage. "I would rather walk into the river than push a mop in my own hotel." Chen's reply was swift. "Then walk out. You are dismissed." Edward's chest rose and fell like a cornered animal. He glanced at the cameras, at the staff, at the billionaire who now held every card, and realized there was no escape from humiliation except retreat. Without another word, he grabbed his briefcase, stormed toward the doors, and disappeared into the afternoon sunlight, his footsteps echoing like a final surrender. Silence followed him out, a silence broken only when Loretta cried, "To Maya!" The staff cheered, clapping, some raising their fists, others wiping tears. Maya, still shaking, tried to protest. I can't do this. I'm not ready. I've been invisible for too long." Chen stepped closer, his voice gentle now. "You are ready. Miss Jackson, you were ready the moment you spoke. Do not let fear tell you otherwise. The world is full of men like him, but today belongs to people like you." Loretta placed a firm hand on Maya's shoulder. "You've carried more on your back than any of them ever could. You belong here." Tanya wiped her eyes and added, "You taught me to speak up without saying a word. Now you're showing me how to lead." Maya's breath trembled, but slowly. A smile broke through her fear. She looked out across the lobby, at the workers who had risen with her, at the guests who would leave with a story they'd never forget, at the billionaire who believed in her more than anyone ever had. And she nodded. "Then I accept," she said softly, but with a strength that carried across the room. Cheers erupted again. Reporters rushed forward, shoving microphones into the air, firing questions. "How does it feel? What will you change first? What message do you have for others overlooked like you?" Maya held up her hands and answered in a steady voice. "This is not about me. It is about every person who has been overlooked, underestimated, or silenced. Today we show the world that talent has no uniform, no title, and no color. Today we prove that dignity belongs to everyone." The words landed like thunder. The cheers grew louder. Chen nodded in approval, then leaned close to whisper, "The summit is yours to manage. Prove to them what I already know. You are the best." Maya's eyes stung with tears. She thought of Amara at home, practicing Mandarin at the kitchen table. She thought of all the nights she told herself not to dream too big. And now here she was, standing in the center of the Regency Lux, no longer invisible, no longer just a maid, but Director of International Relations. In that moment, a chapter closed, and a new one began, not just for her, but for everyone who had been told they didn't belong. 6 months later, the maid they once ignored was now signing $100 million deals in languages her former boss could barely pronounce. That shocking fact was whispered across boardrooms from New York to Beijing, a reminder that the invisible housekeeper had become the face of a global empire. The Regency Lux was no longer called by that name, for the golden letters outside had been replaced by 3 bold words: Unity International. Under Chen Wei's ownership and Maya Jackson's leadership, the once rigid classist hotel had been reborn. The chandeliers still sparkled, the marble still shone, the glass still glistened over Central Park. But now the soul of the place had changed. Gone were the days when staff were treated like shadows. Every voice mattered now. Every worker was given training, mentorship, and pathways to rise. And Maya herself, once hunched over a mop, now sat in the Director of International Relations office, a space overlooking the city skyline, negotiating partnerships with Chinese firms that brought in $100 million in fresh business. She wore suits now instead of uniforms, but the humility in her voice never changed. She spoke to executives the same way she spoke to housekeepers, with respect and clarity. Loretta Brooks had been promoted to Human Resources Supervisor, designing programs that lifted workers who had been ignored for decades. Tanya Rodriguez, once a receptionist who stayed silent out of fear, now managed entire events, walking through the ballroom with confidence. Even the bellhop, inspired by Maya's rise, began studying business part-time with scholarships funded by Chen. But the most touching transformation happened at home. Amara, Maya's 10-year-old daughter, had blossomed in ways that left her mother in tears. She practiced Mandarin nightly, her pronunciation crisp and proud, sometimes surprising her teachers with phrases they themselves had not mastered. One evening, while sitting at the kitchen table, Amara asked, "Mom, does this mean I can be anything I want?" And Maya, remembering the years of closed doors, smiled with tears in her eyes. Yes, baby, anything, yet for all the triumph. Maya still wrestled with her own doubts. In her office at night, staring at city lights, she sometimes whispered, "Do I deserve this? Or will they find out I'm just a maid pretending to be more?" Imposter syndrome gnawed at her, a shadow that followed even into success. But Chen reminded her often, "Miss Jackson, even emperors question themselves. What matters is that you keep building," and Loretta would tease her. "If you were an imposter, you'd have been caught 6 months ago. You're the real thing. Girl, stop doubting it." Slowly, the fear receded, replaced by pride, especially when Amara clutched her hand after school assemblies and said, "They told the whole class my mom speaks more languages than anyone else's mom." I felt so proud. The hotel, under its new banner of Unity International, became a case study in cultural reform. Business journals wrote articles titled "From Maid to Director: How Unity International Transformed Workplace Equity." Guests praised the staff, saying the atmosphere now felt warm, inclusive, alive. Revenues soared, not because of chandeliers or marble, but because of people finally being valued. And then came the moment no one expected. Edward Harrington returned, the once proud CEO, who had stormed out in fury the day Chen purchased the hotel, had fallen far. His debts had multiplied, his name had soured, and the corporate world he once ruled no longer wanted him. He returned not in a $3,000 suit, but in a worn blazer, his eyes hollow, his posture heavy. Staff froze when they saw him walk into the lobby. Some wanted him out immediately, but Maya, sitting in her office, heard the commotion and came down. Edward bowed his head and said quietly, "Miss Jackson, I came to apologize." Gasps swept the staff. For years, Edward had spoken only with arrogance, yet here he was, voice trembling. "I was blind," he said, "blind to talent, blind to dignity. I dismissed you, insulted you, silenced you, and I lost everything. You deserve every bit of what you've built. I only hope you'll forgive me." For a long moment, Maya said nothing. The staff looked at her, waiting to see whether she would humiliate the man who had humiliated her. But she only inhaled slowly and answered, "Mr. Harrington, I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to carry anger where I need to carry hope." His eyes filled with tears, and he nodded. He left shortly after, but not before Maya added, "If you truly want to change, teach young workers what not to do. Show them the mistakes that cost you everything." And he did. Months later, word spread that Edward was working odd jobs at a smaller hotel, mentoring young employees, finally learning humility in the very work he once despised. That was Maya's way. She did not crush her enemies. She transformed them. By the time Unity International hosted its first pre-summit gala, reporters packed the lobby, eager to see the transformation. They snapped photos of Maya greeting Chinese executives with perfect Mandarin, shaking hands with American CEOs, and guiding her staff with dignity. The same chandeliers that once shone over silence now shone over laughter. The same marble that once echoed with Edward's orders now echoed with unity. And through it all, Maya carried herself with grace, knowing that the little girl waiting for her at home was watching every step. She had been invisible once. Now she was leading a movement, and the best part was not the title, not the office, not even the contracts. The best part was when Amara climbed onto her lap one night, rested her head against her mother's chest, and whispered, "Mom, I want to be just like you." In that whisper, Maya knew she had already won more than any summit or contract could ever give. They called her the Maid who moved markets, after stock prices jumped just because she gave a speech. That was the shocking headline splashed across newspapers and business networks. Proof that Maya Jackson's story had grown larger than the hotel, larger than Manhattan, larger than anything she had ever imagined. Maya, who just months ago was scrubbing floors, now found herself standing at podiums across the country, her voice sparking a movement. The viral videos of her speaking Mandarin to Chen Wei and challenging Edward Harrington's arrogance had already been viewed tens of millions of times. But what followed was far greater. National leaders began citing her story as an example of hidden talent. Universities invited her to speak about resilience, and businesses, embarrassed by the inequities she exposed, scrambled to reevaluate their workplace cultures. Unity International became the model, the place journalists pointed to when asked, "What does equity look like in action?" Maya, however, never lost sight of her roots. She carried Amara's photo in her pocket at every conference, a reminder of why she fought. And she carried the words of her late mother in her heart. Lift others as you rise. With Chen Wei's backing, Unity International launched scholarships for underprivileged youth, naming the first one the Maya Jackson Cultural Bridge Fund. The news brought Maya to tears when she realized the fund's very first recipient would be her daughter's classmate. A boy from the Bronx who had once told Amara he could never dream of college. Now, because of her, his future had changed. But Maya's influence spread even further. Lawmakers in Washington, inspired by her story, pushed new initiatives for workplace training and anti-discrimination reform. She was invited to testify, sitting in front of senators who once would never have noticed a woman like her. With steady voice, she said, "We cannot afford to let brilliance mop floors unseen. While boardrooms recycle the same tired ideas, every worker has potential. It is time we stop burying it." Her words echoed across chambers and made evening news. Meanwhile, Chen Wei revealed to her one night why he had placed so much faith in her, sitting across from her in a quiet office. He told her of his own youth in rural China, of hunger and poverty, of selling rice in the streets before he built his empire. "When I saw you, Miss Jackson," he said softly, "I saw myself. Someone they tried to ignore, someone they tried to silence, but strength does not vanish. It waits, and when it rises, the world cannot stop it." Maya, tears in her eyes, bowed her head in gratitude, but the ripples did not end there. Edward Harrington, the man who once mocked her, had slowly begun his own transformation. Working as a janitor at a smaller hotel, he started mentoring young staff, teaching them about the mistakes he had made. Guests were startled to see him carry bags and clean tables. But he did it without shame now. When asked why, he simply said, "I had to lose everything to learn what matters." Maya heard of his humility and sent him a quiet note. "I'm glad you are finally lifting others. Keep going." The nation watched in fascination as this unlikely redemption unfolded side by side with Maya's rise at Unity International. Preparations for the AI summit reached fever pitch. Delegations from around the world poured in, eager not just to discuss technology, but to witness the hotel that had become a symbol of change. Staff who once walked with bowed heads now carried themselves with pride. Loretta, now head of HR, often reminded them, "We are not just workers anymore. We are builders of the future." Tanya, managing entire events, admitted in one late-night conversation with Maya, "If you hadn't spoken up, I would still be afraid. You gave me permission to be brave." The bellhop, who had enrolled in business school, came to Maya one afternoon with his first A on a finance exam. He said, "I never thought I'd belong in a classroom, but now I believe I do." Each story was a ripple. Each change flowed outward, touching lives Maya might never even meet. Yet the most personal ripple came from her daughter. Amara had been invited to join a cultural exchange program in Beijing when Maya told her. Amara's eyes widened. "You mean, I'll go to China? The place you've always loved?" Maya nodded, her heart swelling. "Yes, baby. You'll see what I only dreamed of." Amara hugged her tightly, whispering, "I'll make you proud." In that moment, Maya realized the greatest legacy she could leave was not in boardrooms or contracts, but in her daughter's courage to dream beyond limits. As the summit approached, global media descended on New York. Reporters framed Unity International as a living example of transformation. One headline read, "From mop to microphone, the woman who redefined power in hospitality." Business anchors declared, "If Maya Jackson can lead with authenticity, what excuse do the rest of us have?" Her influence stretched even into communities far from Manhattan. Workers in factories, waiters in diners, cashiers in grocery stores began sharing her videos, saying, "If she can do it, so can I." It wasn't about Mandarin anymore. It was about dignity, about being seen, about proving that greatness can rise from any corner. And as Maya stood in the grand lobby one evening, looking up at the chandeliers, she realized she was no longer carrying just her own story. She was carrying thousands of voices, each waiting to be heard. Chen approached her quietly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Tomorrow begins the summit," he said. "Are you ready?" Maya smiled, her eyes steady. "I've been ready my whole life. I just needed the chance." They said a maid could never stand at the center of a global summit. Yet today, world leaders rose to their feet and gave her a standing ovation. That was the shocking scene inside Unity International's grand ballroom, proof that Maya Jackson's story had not only changed a hotel, but had inspired an entire world. The AI summit had gathered hundreds of dignitaries, executives, journalists, and innovators from every continent. Flags from around the world lined the stage, lights sparkled above, and a hush fell as Maya walked forward to the podium, her heart pounding, her daughter Amara beaming proudly from the front row. For the first time in her life, she was not invisible. She was the voice everyone had come to hear. She began slowly, her voice steady but thick with emotion. "I was told I was just a maid," she said, pausing to let the words hang in the air. "But the truth is, there is no such thing as just anything. Every person has a gift, every person has value, and if we silence them, we lose more than talent, we lose humanity." A ripple of agreement swept the room. She switched seamlessly into Mandarin, addressing Chinese delegates with respect and warmth, her tones precise and fluent. The audience leaned forward, captivated, as she quoted Du Fu, "Though storms rage, the heart can stand like a mountain." Then she turned back to English. "I have weathered storms. So have many of you. But storms do not last. Mountains do." Applause broke out, first polite, then thunderous. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled furiously. But Maya did not stop there. She told her story, not to glorify herself, but to illuminate the millions like her. She spoke of scrubbing marble floors while knowing she carried the education and skill to run conferences. She spoke of being dismissed, silenced, humiliated, and yet refusing to let her gift die. She spoke of Amara, the little girl who inspired her to step forward that day in the lobby when Chen Wei nearly walked away. "I stood up not because I was fearless," she admitted, "but because my daughter deserved to see that courage is possible even when your knees are shaking." By the time she finished, the room was on its feet, applause rolling like thunder under the chandeliers. Amara, trembling with pride, walked to the podium beside her mother and delivered a short speech in Mandarin, her young voice clear and steady. "My mother taught me that language is not only words, it is respect, it is love, and it is hope for the future." Delegates wiped tears from their eyes. Chen Wei, sitting in the front row, nodded with pride, whispering to those beside him, "That girl will carry her mother's legacy further than we can imagine." When the applause finally subsided, Maya looked out over the sea of faces and realized she had stepped into a new role, not just Director of International Relations, but a symbol of change. She concluded, "Let this hotel, once known for exclusion, now be known for inclusion. Let this summit, focused on technology, also focus on humanity. And let my story remind us that brilliance knows no uniform, no color, and no class." The ovation rose again, longer and louder than before, echoing beyond the ballroom and into the world. That night, news outlets declared the summit a triumph, not only for technology but for justice. Headlines blazed, "From Maid to Leader, Maya Jackson redefines global equity." Social media exploded with praise. Workers everywhere shared her words, inspired to demand recognition. Within weeks, Chen and Maya launched a global initiative for workplace reform, partnering with governments and corporations to implement fair practices. Scholarships multiplied, training programs spread. Entire industries began citing Unity International as the gold standard. But beyond the headlines and accolades, the most powerful legacy was personal. Edward Harrington, watching from afar, sent Maya a handwritten note. "I was wrong. Thank you for showing me the truth. I am teaching young workers now, so they never repeat my mistakes." Maya smiled, not in triumph over him, but in quiet satisfaction that even the hardest hearts could change. Loretta Brooks, now thriving in her new role, told Maya, "You gave us more than jobs. You gave us pride," Tanya admitted. "You taught me to find my voice. Now I use it every day." And Amara, bright, hopeful Amara, prepared for her cultural exchange trip to Beijing, her heart set on becoming an interpreter like her mother once dreamed of. One evening, as the sun set over Central Park, Maya stood at her office window, looking out at the skyline that once felt so far beyond her reach. She thought of her mother's struggles, her daughter's dreams, her own journey from mop to microphone. And she whispered Du Fu's words again, "Though storms rage, the heart can stand like a mountain." Tears rolled down her cheeks, not of sorrow, but of gratitude. She had lived to see the day when she was not only seen but celebrated, and more importantly, she had opened doors for others to walk through. Her story would echo long after the summit ended, long after the cameras turned away, because it was no longer just her story. It was a legacy of change, of dignity restored, of voices rising. And as she left the office that night, Amara ran to her, clutching her hand, saying, "Mom, you're my mountain," in that single sentence. Maya knew the truth. She had already built the greatest summit of all, not of technology, but of humanity. Thank you for watching. If this story inspired you, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and give this video a like. Your support helps share these stories of courage with the world.